I did not share. Well, yeah, okay. But just because you can see the screen.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So everybody can see things. Tony, can you hear us?
Yep.
All right. All right, Tony. So we're going to get into Stencil today. We're going to start our first.
Are you in your YouTube live stream right now?
Yeah.
Yeah? How do I see that?
I just started it. It should show up in like 10, 15 seconds. There's a delay of like 20 seconds or something.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, cool. I'll just stay on Zoom then.
Oh, yeah. You want to stay on Zoom because, yeah, there's a delay. It'll get confusing. But, all right. All right, so go into your interns folder, and then we're going to go search for Stencil.js. You can go to stenciljs.com. This is a project that was created by the folks who do Ionic, which is what we use to create all of our mobile apps. Ionic is actually written in Stencil now. So originally Ionic was written in Angular, and then they moved to creating Stencil and then rewrote everything in Stencil, which is their own framework. Stencil has a lot of similarities to React, actually a lot more similarities to React than it does to Angular, either Angular 1 or Angular 2. What is particularly nice about Stencil is that it allows you to create very small functional components, they're called, that you can drop into any website anywhere very easily. So whether that website was written in Angular or raw JavaScript or React or Vue or any of these other frameworks, you can take what is created in your Stencil project and just drop them in as an HTML component and you're ready to go. Okay, so it's really nice, does some really cool things. You also get access, if you set it up correctly, and I'll show you how to do this, to all of the Ionic framework components that already exist. So, why is this green thing stuck around my screen?
It's because you're recording. You're sharing your screen. It's because you're sharing.
Yeah.
That's not always there, though. A new thing? It's real annoying. I do not like it. Alright, so, yeah. You get access to all of these components that already exist. So, like, let's just go look at a button, for example. So you see there's all these pretty buttons. In order to create one of those buttons, all you have to do is say ion-button and then give it these attributes. So you can say like expand block, and that'll say full width of the button with rounded corners, or expand full, or you can say fill, so you can have clear buttons or outlined buttons or solid buttons. You can change the size, so you can have small, default, or large. You can have all kinds of different things, and it tells you what those things are down here, so you can change out any of these attributes and what their values are. So we'll go through some examples of that in a moment. But for us to get started, we want to go to Stencil. We're going to go to Docs, and you can read through all of this. It probably would be a good idea for all of you to read through every word of this. Some of it's not going to make sense. You don't necessarily have to get stuck on the things that don't make sense, but read through it so you have a reference for some of the things that we'll be talking about in the future. We're going to go down to this Get Started section. Tony, can you mute yourself? All right, so we're going to go down to the Getting Started section, and you're going to go down all the way to the bottom where it says Updating Stencil. And it has this line of code that says npm install @stencil/core@latest. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is installing globally Stencil as an npm node module package that we can then use to run on the computer. So you can copy that code, go to your terminal, paste it, should do a little install thing. All right. Once we get that done,
into classes, or
it doesn't matter. It's a global installed thing, so you can be anywhere. Right. And you just want to be in your interns folder. Right. So you don't have to go into classes. That's just because I'm instructing. But yeah, right. Like this, I'm going to push this up, and it's going to go into the classes group on inside of our summer interns projects. So you want to just be inside your intern, so you can create your own version of this. Right. All right, so then to get started, you just do npm init stencil, and it tells you how to do this just a little further up on the page, right here. All right. Once you type npm init stencil, you press enter, That's going to bring you to a prompt screen. There's 3 options that are available. There is, and they go from sort of lowest level, you're just trying to create something very simple, to we're going to provide you with more of a framework and make your life a little bit easier. So a component is like, I just want to build this very basic raw HTML, start from scratch. I'm going to write all my own CSS. I don't want anything helping me out. I'm just going to write HTML and CSS and create my component that way. And I'm going to drop it in other frameworks and they can use it. We're not going to start there because it's kind of a pain, because it's nice to have Ionic available to you. Also, we're going to create multiple components, more than one, which technically you can do inside of a component project, but if you're building something that's more complex that has multiple components, you generally want to make it at least an app. App is the same thing as component, really, except that you're saying, I want to do more than just create a single component. I want to build a website that has lots of components inside of it. Okay. So that's what app is. And then Ionic PWA moves you to the next level, and here you get a lot of the advantages of having the Ionic framework. So you can use like that Ion button component inside of your components, and you don't have to start everything from scratch. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to choose Ionic PWA. To do that, you just press enter. If you wanted another one, you can press your up and down arrows and change, but we're just going to press enter on Ionic PWA. All right, and then project name, you can name it whatever you want. I think in the tutorial example, they call it my first component, my dash. So it has to be letters and dashes. I think those are the only options. You might be able to use underscores and numbers, but generally speaking, you want to name it with letters and dashes. So we're going to just say example dash project. Now you might actually want to name it with your name at the end. So example dash project dash Sam or Evan or whatever. Just so that when you go to push it, you don't have conflicts with somebody else who creates the URL. Alright, so then we press enter on that, and it says, are you sure you want to do this? If you type N, it'll cancel out, so we're going to do a capital Y, and it finishes. Then it gives you some instructions on how to get started right here. So we want to cd into the folder that we just created, so the example dash project, and then you can just run npm start. It's going to go through this build phrase. You can see it's starting up a localhost server, so it's localhost 333. You probably have 4 threes. I have another one that's already running, so it just moved it to the next port.
So,
So, no, go ahead.
I think it's npm. You can run multiple servers at the same time.
Yeah, so what's actually happening is that npm start command. I'll show you how that works. All right, so I'm going to go into our interns folder in Ruby Mine, and we'll see we have the new project sitting there. So I have this new example project. If I go inside of there, you see it built all kinds of code. When I did that npm init, npm stencil init, we're going to work most inside of this source here. But if you look at the package.json, so we did this before with our own JavaScript projects, right? But it creates a name for us based on the name we gave. It starts off with a version, some other things. But if you look here under scripts, so inside of your package.json, you can write node scripts. Node scripts will allow you to run things from your command line. Start here calls stencil, which is another node command that they've written. So if we went inside of node modules, and we go look at stencil somewhere in here, or it could be in that globally installed one that we created. There's a command called stencil. Yep, there it is, stencil, which calls bin stencil. We could follow that deeper, but right, they've written code that allows you to be able to call this. So when you do npm start, what it's really doing is saying, let me look in package.json. So npm and then anything, what it does is it says, let me look in the package.json for the directory that I'm in and see if there's anything with the scripts tag, and then let me. So they also have build and test and watch. And we'll get to those things later, but for now we're just trying to build some stuff. So we do npm start, and that's going to start up our server, and we can start playing around with things. Most of the code that you're going to write, pretty much everything you're going to do, is going to be inside of the source directory. In this source directory, you can see there's a www directory, which is more or less a copy of your source directory. what's happening is when you do this serve and it's doing the dev watch serve, any changes that you make to your source directory, it compiles and puts in the www directory, and that's what you're actually seeing on the screen. So what we're going to see is we're writing everything in what they call TSX, so it's TypeScript, which is a higher low. It's just an easier way of writing JavaScript. Is really all that comes down to. But they're going to compile this into actual JavaScript, and that's what we'll find inside of our build folder in the WWS. They also do some nice things, like we talked about uglifying code and compacting code to make things load faster and more performant. They're doing that. They also do some nice lazy loading and all kinds of other things. But that's what's going on there. So the actual thing that you're serving is inside of www. You never really have to look at that. But the code that you're interacting with is inside of source. Inside of source even, the thing that you're most often going to be interacting with are these components. So there's 3 of them that they build for you by default. There's a home, there's a profile, and there's a root. We go here, we're on our home page. That's where it's starting. And go inside of that to the profile page. That's what my profile looks like. Nothing super interesting, it's just a little starter thing to have something to start with. Okay, and I go back to home. All right. So we'll look at those components briefly. The first one to start with is this app root. Inside of here, we have our router. This is just declaring our routes. So it says that when profile / and then some name, I want to go to my app profile. Okay. So like here, what's happening when I click on the profile page, you see I went to /profile / Ionic, so it's on the profile page. So we're just naming some routes. And we'll get into more difficult things with that, but most of the time all it is you're naming the / and then whatever you want it to be for your URL, and you're declaring what component you want it to interact with. All right, so that's all root does. It's just your routing. And then if we go to home, we'll see the actual home page getting created. If we go to app home TSX, you see it's a very simple thing. Component is saying I want to create some new little JavaScript HTML component. The tag is it's just going to be like, this is our HTML component. So like P, you would wrap this into the 2 carets, right? So like a P tag, you can put there and you wrap it into 2 components, and the 2 carets, we're doing the same thing here. So app home is just an HTML, it's just how we want to name our HTML element. So app home, and then our style URL is a reference to where we want to put our CSS for this particular component. So if we open up app home.css, there's nothing in there at all. They haven't actually styled or anything. So
how does it know what's on the actual page if this is just declaring a component?
So when we are in this app root, right?
When you you rooted it to there, but now it's getting there, and all I see is a class. That's
So let's walk through this, right? So if I go to index.html, we see the component that's being added is app root, right? App root is saying, look at my URL, and in our case, because we've declared it this way, my URL is just /. So if my URL is /, then I want to load onto this page the component of app home. So then it looks through our components and says, hey, I've got a component that has a tag of app home. So what I'm going to load is what's inside of this render function.
Okay. Does it go top down and see whichever one hits first?
It does, yeah. So you want to name your things uniquely so you don't end up with problems. Okay. But then here, you can name the class name actually doesn't matter at all. You can name every one of them the same class name. What you really care about, what it's looking for, is this tag name that you put in your component. Okay. And what it's going to do then is say, anywhere that I see app home in my HTML, I'm going to replace that with whatever I put inside of this render function. So in our case, what we're doing is we're returning a bunch of HTML that just
Subcomponent for your home page. You just make a subfolder in app home. Like let's say I wanted to use, or like where would you declare that? Would you declare, like something that's not an actual page, but it's just a part of your project.
Yeah, so you could do it that way. What their best practice is to create one component per directory. So if you wanted to do something like that, what you would do is new directory home, and then you'd probably move app home inside of there. And then inside of home, you would create a new directory called like other thing, right? So like, what's a thing we might want to, like an image. Let's create it. We'll create one. We'll create our actual, like an image thing that we want to throw up there. So let's just name it image. And most of the time you just want to come in and you want to copy some other TSX file that you've been using. So we'll just copy app home, we'll rename it image. We want our tag to just be image. We're not going to do any styling, so we're just going to remove that for the moment. And then when we render, we just want to replace this with like image source equals, hold on, I'll go get one for real. So we're not doing anything very interesting at all, right? What we've done is we've created a component with a tag of image, and we're just gonna, anywhere that you see the image HTML in this project, it's going to just display this particular picture.
Can you? I thought you had to use a dash in the tag name. Is that true?
If you have multiple names, if there's multiple words. So like if I wanted to name this full image, I would do full image. But I only have one word, right? It's like snake case or underscore or camel casing, right? Like when you have multiple words, you use a dash. But in our case, we only have one word, so we don't. That makes sense? So now that I have this image component created, and it's very simple, right? Like you can see all I'm doing is importing component and age from stencil core. You do have to do both of those things. If you don't, RubyMine will yell at you anyway, and it'll tell you you should be doing that. You have to do this add component thing where you can put a tag and you can put some other options there, including a style URL. The tag name is just your HTML, which will show you how that translates in just a second. You have a class that you're exporting, which you can name whatever you want. You usually want to name it based on whatever the tag name is. So we'll name it image. That's just for reference and understanding and that type of thing. And then you're given this render function, and then the render function you write your HTML. Okay. You can write JavaScript inside of that render function too, which we'll get to in a second. But for right now, we're just going to write our HTML. So we're just going to give back an image tag with a source that's film right.
And you don't have to change the root to app home, maybe the routing file.
The routing file is still referencing app home because
Even though it's in the home folder.
Because it's looking for anything in our project that has a tag of app home. It's not a location inside of folders, which is also really nice because for organization, if you want to move things around, you don't have to go re-reference everything. You can just move it, and it's fine. Okay. So the thing that's getting referenced is it's app home, and then it looks through our directory and says, is there anything that has a tag of app home? And this does. So it says, okay, I'm going to display that when I'm on the root, which says I'm going to render this bit of HTML here. And what we can do is drop in our image tag. So no standard. Okay, so maybe we do have to do that. Oh, I feel like it'd be a new thing. But we can say like app-image. And then when we go here, we just also need to do app-image. And now if we go back to our home page, there it is. Okay. What's cool about this is we could like once we build this, and I'll show you guys eventually how to build this into NPM, or you can serve it on a website. Anybody who wants to use it, just like we do with jQuery, right? Like we pull that into our app. Now anybody who NPM installs this set of code that we've created, or they're bringing it in from the served website, they can just put that app-image HTML tag anywhere, and they'll get that full merge picture. They don't have to put the source in. They don't have to write image source equals. They can just do app image and they're ready to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So this gives us a way of creating very small components that we can use, and we can then use together to build a much larger site. Okay. So if we think about our to-do list, we can start to rebuild our to-do list now using Stencil. Okay, and we're gonna start to do that today.
Why do you end your the app image thing with the forward slash?
So nothing goes in between. Like I don't need an ending tag, right? This is the same with all HTML actually. So like a lot, like image, right? If you do img source, you don't put. If I do img source equals.
Yeah, but usually you don't. Okay, I haven't seen that notation.
Right, you don't do this, right? Because there's nothing to go in between the tag. Could, this is equally valid, it's just by convention not as nice. I'm not putting anything in between the two tags, so there's no need for it. So the alternative is to just put the slash at the end and say, I'm gonna put this thing up. That makes sense? Okay, so now if we want to start building out a to-do list again, let's see what's the easiest way to do this. Let's just create, for now, a new directory called app-to-do list. And I'm just going to copy the image .tsx that I just created into there. And we're not going to use home, so I'm just going to delete it. We're not going to use the profile, so I'm just going to delete it.
Just ask what shortcut you're going to copy stuff like that.
Command-C, maybe. So if I go to my app root, where I'm going to want to go, and I'll rename this so that it matches. Refactor, rename, if you guys haven't figured that out yet. I'm just going to do app-to-do-list. And nothing special about this, I'm just naming the file based on what we're trying to do. Right, so it's just so that it's readable. And then finish. Alright, so now when I'm on my root, I want to go to my to-do list component, right? I don't want to go to app-home, I'm going to want to go to my to-do list component. So I'm going to do app-to-do-list. We're not going to worry about this profile guy anymore. When I open up app-to-do list, I need to make sure that the tag matches. Now it does. Alright. So now that I've made these changes, what do we think is going to happen when I reload the page? When I'm at this slash of the URL? We're just going to see the image. Because again, what we have on index.html is this app root component. If we go to the app roots component, so something that has the tag of app root, what we find is an app that has a router that has a URL of slash set to go to app to-do list. So what's going to happen is when we go to the URL with a slash, it's going to look for any other components in our project that has an app-to-do-list, and it's going to load that onto the screen. So if we go look at our app-to-do-list, we see in our render function what we're returning is just an image with film there. Okay, so if I go do that, boom. Just an ugly image of Bill Murray. All right, so now we can start to actually build out our to-do list, and it's really not all that different from what you guys were doing before. And if you want to, you can even take much of the code that you've created and start to drop it in here. You could, right, like before we had, what are some of the things that we need for a to-do list?
And input.
Input, so we could do input. Those curly braces it's doing for a reason I'll get into later. But okay, so we have an input. So if I go back and look at it now, and it auto reloads, we have this input. It's massive, it goes all the way across the screen, but we have it. Here's the thing though, now that we have Ionic, we can make pretty things. So we're going to go look at Ionic and see if they have an input that maybe makes this look a little nicer. and they do. They have this thing called ion input, which you could just do by itself. It becomes much nicer, though, it turns out, if you put it inside of an ion item, which actually generally goes into an ion list. And you should also read through all the ionic docs, and you'll see this happen. But what we're going to do is we're just going to create an ion list, and we're going to put this one item inside of it. Again, ion item, you see it just has a default label and then some ion input. So if we go back and look, again, it reloaded by itself. Now I have an input that goes all the way across. If we go back and look at ionic, we can make things a little bit prettier. So you see they have a position of floating, a position of fixed, and a position of stacked. So you can play around with those a little bit. Say position floating. What did I miss? I misspelled it. And it's actually telling me that here. That's the other nice thing about moving to this. When you use TypeScript and you use these types of components, it actually knows that the ion label component has a thing called position that requires a string. Okay, but I misspelled position, so then the red thing goes away. So now if I go back, see what it does. It's just a nice little thing. Ionic also has these things called cards, which make things even prettier. You've seen cards before, probably. Cards are just cards, right? Like the Instagram feed cards and things. So we're just going to put our list inside of a card. Just make things look a little bit nicer. I should put it inside of ion card content. Just get some padding. So we have a little pattern. Okay, so we have this card. It's got an input in it, has default label, all kinds of other stuff going on there. Right? All right. Ionic is built mobile first, so everything looks particularly nice in the mobile format, but it does expand and do the right things when you go to desktop. They also have accessors, so you can actually tell. You can read through the docs on how to do this, but Ionic will actually let you know if you're on desktop or in mobile, so you can make decisions on what you end up showing and how you show it. All right, so we have this thing here, and we could just say like, you guys are calling this thing. So what else do we need for our list to work?
List items.
Yep, so we need some list items. One way to do that is to just put them here. You can again just use ion item. And then see it auto load. There you go. Go to the store.
So now you need to do is to create list items.
Yep. So we have a couple things starting to show up. Yeah, so let's say we want to be able to create them. So we want to create them by what? Typing something into this input and then saving.